Today's story is one about the ones close to you. Can you be sure that your neighbors really are the friendly people you believe them to be? I guess you'll have to find out for yourself in due time. For now, I hope you enjoy today's story. If you do, please consider liking and subscribing. Thank you. I'm not the kind of guy who usually shares stuff online. My family says I'm more of a keep it to yourself type. But what happened after we moved to this small town? I gotta tell someone. Maybe you'll think I'm making it up, or maybe it'll sound too ordinary to be scary. But it's all true, and it's been eating at me. We moved here about a year ago. My job lets me work remotely, and after all the craziness in the city, we thought a small town would be a safer, quieter place for us and the kids. The house we bought was this charming, old, 2-story, at the end of a cul-de-sac. It needed work, but we fell in love with its potential and the big backyard that bordered a dense patch of woods. Our nearest neighbors, the Thompsons, lived about 100 yards away. Their place was well kept, with a manicured lawn and flowers lining the walkway. Mr. Thompson introduced himself the day we moved in. He was a big, burly man with a firm handshake and a booming laugh. His wife, Sarah, was the complete opposite. Petite, with a quiet voice and a shy smile. They seemed nice, the kind of neighbors you'd borrow sugar from or chat with over the fence. The first few months were a blur of unpacking, setting up the house, and getting the kids enrolled in school. We saw the Thompsons now and then. Sarah would wave from her garden, and Mr. Thompson would nod as he mowed their lawn. It was all very neighborly. But as autumn turned to winter, I started noticing things. Small things, really, but they began to add up. Sarah seemed to be outside less and less, and when I did see her, she looked tired. Not the I didn't sleep well kind of tired, but a deep, worn-out exhaustion that seemed to hang on her shoulders. I mentioned it to my wife, but we figured it was none of our business. Everyone has rough patches, right? Then there were the noises. Our bedroom window faces their house, and some nights I'd hear them arguing. It was muffled, their voices raised in anger. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. The first few times I brushed it off as normal couple stuff. But one night, the shouting was so loud it woke me up. I lay there in the dark, listening until it suddenly stopped. Everything went quiet. Too quiet. It made my skin crawl, but what could I do? Call the cops because neighbors were fighting. Winter passed, and spring brought everything back to life. Sarah was outside more, working in her garden, but she seemed different. She'd lost weight, and there were dark circles under her eyes. We'd wave and exchange polite hellos, but she always kept her distance. One day, I saw her at the local grocery store. She was wearing a long-sleeved shirt despite the warm weather. When she reached for something on a high shelf, her sleeve slipped down, revealing a bruise on her arm. It was dark and looked painful. Our eyes met, and she quickly pulled her sleeve back down, gave me a tight-lipped smile, and hurried away. I couldn't stop thinking about that bruise. It looked like someone had grabbed her hard. Too hard. I talked to my wife about it, and we debated what to do. Should we say something? Offer help? But what if we were wrong? We didn't want to make things awkward or, worse, make them worse for Sarah if we were right. Summer came, and with it, a sense of unease that I couldn't shake. The kids played outside, running through the sprinkler and laughing. but my eyes were always drawn to the Thompsons' house. It was quiet. Too quiet. We hadn't seen Sarah in weeks, and Mr. Thompson was hardly ever around. When he was, he didn't wave or smile. He just went about his business, a grim look on his face. Then, one evening in late July, everything changed. I was grilling dinner on the back deck when I heard sirens. Living in a small town, sirens were rare, and these were getting closer. I walked to the front yard in time to see 2 police cars and an ambulance turn down our cul-de-sac, stopping in front of the Thompsons' house. My heart sank. Something bad had happened. I could feel it. Neighbors started coming out of their houses, drawn by the commotion. We all stood there watching as the police knocked on the Thompsons' door. Mr. Thompson answered, his face pale. The officers talked to him for a moment before they went inside. We couldn't see much from where we were, but the tension in the air was palpable. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, the paramedics came out, wheeling a stretcher. There was a body on it, covered with a white sheet. A collective gasp went through the crowd of neighbors. My stomach churned. It was Sarah. It had to be. I looked at Mr. Thompson, who was now sitting in the back of a police car, his head in his hands. The days that followed were a blur of rumors and whispered conversations. Mr. Thompson had been arrested, charged with the murder of his wife. The details that emerged were horrifying. They'd been fighting, and he'd lost his temper. It wasn't the first time, but it was the last. Sarah's body had been found in their living room, her life ended by the man who was supposed to love and protect her. Our small town was rocked by the tragedy. We all asked ourselves the same questions. How did we not see it? Could we have done something to prevent it? The guilt was heavy, a burden we all shared. We'd lived next door to a monster and hadn't known it, or maybe we didn't want to know. I keep thinking about Sarah, about all the signs we missed or chose to ignore, the bruises, the arguments, the silence. It's a reminder that evil doesn't always look like we expect it to. Sometimes it's hidden behind a friendly wave or a polite smile. And sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that happen right next door, in broad daylight. The aftermath of Sarah's death was like a wound that wouldn't heal, not just for me, but for the entire town. The Thompsons' house stood empty, a constant reminder of the horror that had occurred within its walls. Yellow crime scene tape fluttered in the breeze for weeks until it was finally taken down, leaving nothing but the memories of what had happened. I found myself lying awake at night, replaying everything over and over in my mind. The guilt was suffocating. We had seen the signs, heard the arguments, noticed the bruises. Yet we did nothing. We told ourselves it wasn't our place to interfere, that we didn't know the whole story. But the truth was, we were afraid of getting involved, afraid of making things worse, afraid of facing the reality that someone we knew could be capable of such violence. The questions were endless. What if we had reached out to Sarah? What if we had called the police sooner? Would it have made a difference? The not knowing was the hardest part. It gnawed at me, a constant ache in the pit of my stomach. In the weeks that followed, the town held a vigil for Sarah. People gathered in the local park, lighting candles and sharing memories of her. She'd been loved, it turned out. Despite her quiet nature, she had touched the lives of many in our small community. Listening to others speak, I realized how little we had really known her. She had been our neighbor, but we had never taken the time to truly understand her struggles, her fears. The vigil was a turning point for me. I realized that staying silent, keeping to ourselves, wasn't the answer. Sarah's death had exposed the underbelly of our idyllic small-town life. Domestic violence, hidden behind closed doors, whispered about but rarely confronted. I started volunteering at a local domestic violence shelter, using my grief and guilt as fuel to help others. It wasn't much, but it was a start. My wife joined me, and together we attended workshops and seminars, educating ourselves on the signs of abuse and how to help those in need. We also became more involved in our community, advocating for better resources for victims of domestic violence. We pushed for educational programs in schools and for local law enforcement to receive training on handling domestic abuse cases. It was hard, often frustrating work, but if we could save even one person from suffering the same fate as Sarah, it would be worth it. As for our neighborhood, it changed too. People started looking out for each other more, checking in if they noticed something amiss. The tragedy had brought us together in a way nothing else could. We were no longer just neighbors. We were a community, united in our determination to prevent another tragedy. The Thompsons' house eventually sold, and a new family moved in. They were wary at first, aware of the house's history, but we welcomed them with open arms. We didn't want the shadow of what had happened to darken their new beginning. Instead, we hoped to build something positive from the tragedy, a legacy of awareness and support. I still think about Sarah, about the what-ifs and the could-have-beens. Her death will always be a part of our story, a stark reminder of the evil that can lurk beneath the surface of everyday life. But her legacy is more than just a cautionary tale. It's a call to action, a reminder to look beyond the surface, to listen, and to care. In sharing this story, I don't seek forgiveness or absolution for my inaction. Instead, I hope to inspire others to take notice, to get involved, and to help prevent domestic violence. It's a daunting task, but it's one we must undertake, because the scariest stories are the ones that could have been prevented. And it's up to us to write a different ending.